From Sattva Knowledge Institute, this is Decoding Impact, the podcast where we apply systems thinking in conversation with extraordinary experts to understand what it truly takes to scale solutions in the social sector. Decoding Impact is hosted by Ratish Balakrishnan, a co-founder and managing partner at Sattva. Welcome to today's episode.
The gross merchandise value for the digital commerce retail market in India was 2.85 lakh crore in 2020. While that sounds like a large number, it is only 4.3% of the total retail GMV in India. And if that number has to grow, it has to be in a manner that is both inclusive and is working at scale. India is estimated to have 6.3 crore micro, small and medium enterprises, most of which are not part of the digital revolution. For the digital commerce to be truly inclusive, we need to onboard these MSMEs not just on one platform, but across many platforms. In the podcast, we will explore open network for digital commerce and how it will address and enable many MSMEs to be part of the digital commerce movement. We have with us Sujith Nair, who is the CEO and co-founder of Beckn Foundation, the Genesis author and angel donor to an open source initiative called the Beckn Protocol that enables the creation of decentralized digital economy ecosystems. Prior to Beckn, Sujith headed management consulting practices and businesses in areas of mobility and digital payments. Sujith has been part of many large-scale digital ecosystem transformations in India that include the Aadhaar and the pioneering effort in India's urban mobility sector with open payment interoperability that formed the genesis of India's National Common Mobility Card Specifications, or the India One Nation, One Card initiative. Sujith, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Absolutely pleasure being here. Thank you.
Excellent. Sujith, we want to cover a whole bunch of things today, but I'd love to start with your background. What brought you here to Beckn?
The interesting conversation that started off Beckn was rooted in the sector of urban mobility, the space where I spent almost a decade now, trying to bring interoperability in my own little way. Payment interoperability was the route I had taken initially. This is immediately after my stint with Aadhaar. But this conversation that Nandan, Pramod and I had was to look at interoperability as a way to solving for the societal problem of urban mobility, the transport. It's so difficult to answer this question of a customer saying, how do I go from point A to point B? Today you have several forms of mobility, you have many choices, but sort of no solution at the end of the day because they all operate in silos and there's enough of information asymmetry and puts on a cognitive load, and we still kind of gravitate back to depending on our own personal vehicles and use whatever little of the roads that we have to go from point A to point B. So the idea of Beckn started off with saying that instead of trying to create another platform or a solution by ourselves, is it possible to kind of find a way to unify all the offerings that are there, whether it's an auto rickshaw on the road or a bus or a metro or the bike sharing or the new forms of mobility, including, of course, ride hailing is not new anymore, but all these together, and can they come together seamlessly to answer this question for the end user? So how do we make mobility a consumer-centric digital service rather than a form-centric, solution? So that idea kind of sort of led us to thinking that can we do something similar to what has been done in India with digital rails as an idea, starting with Aadhaar and UPI. Is there an opportunity to think of a similar digital rail as a set of specifications, not as a platform or a software, but a set of specifications that can bring the ecosystem of mobility service providers together and make it seamless for the end user to find all these options at a place of her or his convenience. So that's kind of it's a genesis conversation that led to the creation of Beckn Protocol specifications. It was essentially Beckn Mobility at that time. But I think as we were solving for it and we were designing these specifications, we sort of discovered what we call the deeper truth of that essential vocabulary of that specification is pretty relevant beyond mobility as well. I mean, the adjacent sector like logistics and even beyond that to hyperlocal commerce and commerce in general. Today, Beckn is going beyond commerce into looking at healthcare, skilling, and many other sectors. So, but it's interesting that it's sort of all this idea emanated from the problem of mobility that we were trying to attempt to solve in 2018.
No, this is fascinating, and I want to break this into three parts, right? The first part is the discussion on mobility itself, and I want to make sure I get that right. The second part of it is the idea of protocol, and we had a session earlier on OCN, and because protocol is not intuitive, it's not something everybody understands, and as to why that's important, except if you've done computer science and you realize, okay, there is HTTP or something like that. So I want to talk about that. But the third thing I want to touch upon is exactly what you talked about, how something that was designed for mobility has become now something that is relevant for hyperlocal commerce, which is probably not intuitive. So I want to try to talk about that. But let's start with mobility. There was a recent announcement that the German government made where they said you have a €9 card. You use that card to get on a bus, you can get on a train, you can get on any form of vehicle that I guess the government is running and probably not private players. And they said that's an invitation to come into Germany and explore the tourism. That doesn't exist in India today. The bus providers, the train providers, the rate cab providers. Is that the problem that you're solving? To say, hey, I'm leaving from home and I have an interconnected set of options that take me from option A to option B, where the payment is one aspect of it, but the interconnectedness from a consumer-centric perspective. Was that the problem you were looking to solve?
It's interesting that you mentioned that many cities in Europe and other places do have this sort of a common card, and I think India has been doing some kind of initiative in that. I think you already spoke about One Nation, One Card as part of my introduction. I think it does solve the problem, but it does only solve the problem to an extent. As you said, it mostly works for those transit ecosystems which are largely public funded transit systems. But if you look at the innovation, the evolution of form itself that's happening, it's happening at the breathtaking space. I mean, we're talking about autonomous cars and urban aviation at some point. So I don't think one solution, or whether it's in the form of a card or a payment, I think that betting on one form of a solution to bring the ecosystem together, especially if you're solving for a population scale adoption, may be scalable or sustainable beyond a point, which is where the idea is to probably think a bit more, sort of have a more minimalistic approach of not trying to define a particular solution like a common card or all, but go beyond that and say, why don't we sort of create an enabling infrastructure in the form of a digital specifications? And I know you do have questions on protocols, I'll come to that later, but create this way of letting other people find the solution that brings them together. Sometimes it could be a card, but is card alone sufficient? No. Probably you would need some smart tech entrepreneurs to harness the ubiquity of smartphones in the hands of people. So you don't need a plastic card anymore, but using the smartphones, is it possible for them to bring all these services together and organize the trip and use the options, pick and choose whatever options of mobility are available, and then plan their trip? And as part of that, maybe use this card to make the payment or make the booking and do all sort of that. And somebody can blend in, add another layer of solution saying that, okay, while you're on your way, why can't I deliver you coffee or something like that? So if you want that to happen, then it's important that we create a more minimalistic but enabling infrastructure, and then let solutions be evolve on top of it by the larger ecosystem. So this is probably one of the ways of calling it, not solving it yourself, but distributing the ability to solve. And that's pretty much what internet did, or for that matter, any infrastructure has done. I mean, if you have a village and if you lay a road or a highway, the village becomes a town becomes a city, there's economic development all happening, not because the road was trying to do anything by itself, but it allowed for access for economic development and opportunities to show up. So similarly, if you were to take that same analogy, and that's exactly what internet did. Internet just did not particularly solve for shopping or mobility, it just laid out that infrastructure and it allowed people to build solutions on top of that. So that's a much more broader thinking we have done with Beckn, and so in a way, it's combining these one card story with maybe ubiquity of smartphones and bringing all of that together and let the entrepreneurial innovation build on top of it to solve for this problem.
And I want to spend a little more time on that, Sujith, because the idea that we are enabling innovation to happen is a journey. Like you said, it starts on the road and walking on the road. People move from products to platforms, So if I'm an entrepreneur today, for me to set up shop is a lot more easier because I have an infrastructure where everything else is taken care of, so I can innovate on top. So platforms people intuitively understand because there are so many of them around us. Protocols, not so much. Unless you've done computer science and they tell you about how, HTTP as a protocol that enables people to talk to each other, you probably not use that in a regular, model. So I would love to ask you more about why protocol and what does that enable, and I'll let you sort of answer that. But the second thing I want to touch as part of that, I think it's also part of a larger innovation that India is driving in the world. Which is, I think, much bigger than what every other country is looking, which is to say, is there a new paradigm for solving for scale? And I don't know if I'm right, but I'd love to have you speak about that as well.
To answer your question on why protocols, and I understand, I don't think it's expected that beyond people who are involved in building tech solutions are expected to know what a protocol is. I mean, the idea is to see what is the value of what it is rather than what it is. But the fact that we have always been using some of the other protocol. The fact that there are 200 billion emails being sent across the planet on a daily basis. The fact that there are 25 billion devices connected to the internet itself is because somebody thought of these protocols. I mean, somewhere along the path of the evolution of internet, I think probably the focus on protocol evolution, protocol development sort of faded. And then, of course, this whole innovation, private innovation, platform economy, and the whole, the Silicon Valley thing took off in a big way. So maybe protocols kind of fell back. But the idea, what protocol did, is actually something phenomenal. I mean, the reason why we have internet is because we have a stack of internet protocols, TCP, IP, HTTP, and all of that. But what it does is precisely that. It did not try to build a particular point solution to solve something. It just enabled that infrastructure for allowing the Amazons and Airbnbs and Uber to build solutions on top of that. Nobody sort of forethought that there will be an Amazon, but the fact that something like this is available, you're able to create something on top of that. And today, for solving for mobility or commerce, why is protocol important? I think that's an important question to ask. So if you look at the general model of any digital economy, whether it's commerce, mobility, food delivery, it's kind of premised on this one model, this edifice which sort of assumes that the buyer and the seller, the consumer and the provider need to be on the same platform to discover each other, find a way to trust and transact with each other. Now that model itself by design has a scale issue because it mandates the need of a central intermediary who takes this effort of bringing the consumer side and the supply side together onto one platform, and then some kind of transaction and economy flourishes on that platform. But what if we were to reduce the dependency on having an intermediary, because one intermediary cannot be bringing everybody on board. And the fact that despite so many years of commerce, retail commerce is only 7% of what's actually happening, shows that beyond a point, one or two or few platforms cannot solve for the population scale problem. So therefore, what if we were to rethink this model? Or at least while the model is continuing, why don't we think of a complementary model where if we were to reduce this dependency or take away this dependency of buyer and seller having to be on the same platform? What if the buyer is on any platform of their choice? I mean, typically every smartphone user is on some platform or the other. He's on Android phone or an iOS phone, or he's probably using a Google Map or a chat messenger or any of those. So he's on some platform or the other. What if from the platform that the buyer is present on, can he naturally discover a seller who happens to be on another platform, but is becoming naturally discoverable and go beyond discovery and actually engage in sort of any buying, selling transactions with them? For that to happen, you need to have those separate platforms where the buyers and sellers start talking to each other through a common language, which semantically understands the concept of commerce, the concept of, teleconsultation or things like that. And so since nobody wrote that, I thought it's important to write that specification which everybody agrees to. It's like, natural language like English. English is by design interoperable for the very reason, right? So if we can create an interoperable language, which two platforms can understand, then you are actually overcoming this problem of the needing to have both buyer and seller on the same platform. And that by itself unlocks value, because now a buyer can not just talk to the seller on one platform, but many platforms. And the seller can discover buyer on many platforms while staying on one platform. So that automatically kind of expands the access vector mutually. significantly. And this idea is not very radical, because this is exactly how emails operate or internet operates. I mean, the sender and receiver emails are not on the same platform. So therefore, I think there is relevance in why we should look at as a protocol way of finding a way to provide access, enable inclusion, and more importantly, drive market expansion. Now, on top of this kind of a new model, if you can allow innovation to happen at both ends, you don't have to wait for one intermediary to let innovation happen. Now you're opening access to a smart tech entrepreneur who can bring a bunch of taxi drivers online without having to worry about acquiring customers himself or herself. Now he just has to bring the supply liquidity onto a platform or a bunch of platforms. The demand is already available on an open network. So that's where I think protocol conversation is very important and very relevant in the current times, because we are looking at giving every small business sort of a right or a freedom to do business online. I mean, as much as every small business is trying to be internet friendly, I thought, why don't we sort of flip it the other way and say, is there a way we can make internet small business friendly by kind of removing this rite of passage of having to be dependent on one intermediary who has to solve for both sides?
So before starting Sattva, Sujith, my background was in middleware architecture and enterprise integration. And just one organization in a company, I know how much pain it is to have 20 systems talk to each other, and the amount of, literally plumbing that you do to make that happen. Now you make that population scale, and just to not know how do I talk about the word buy, what does it mean? The word sell, what does it mean across? Just not having a common definition. It's such a deceptively simple idea, and when it's done, it takes off so much transaction friction from a problem. But the point that you made, about why this is important, one, you touched upon a very important point around scale. Saying no two players are going to scale, however big they are, if they're going public. But the second thing that I think is important also is that in the absence of that interoperability, I think the intermediary gets a lot of power. Because once they've locked them in, you can then put as many discounts as you want, you can change the rules of the game, and then a lot of the impact is downstream. By enabling interoperability, putting agency on the guy who's on the platform saying, listen, if it's not you, I'm going to somebody else. I have more choice, which I think in the long run actually creates better balance. Because a lot of what we see, and I don't know if you agree with it, a lot of what we see in big tech is the concentration of power of the few people who have lock-ins with a large part of the market. And I'll just add one point, and I'd love to have you react to that. A friend of mine started one of the first bus company, Red Bus. And a lot of his work was to convince bus guys to give him seats. Now imagine he gets that for free. All his effort is around citizen experience. All his effort is going to be about making last mile more friendly. And I'm guessing this, in addition to solving for scale, builds the agency of the participants in the platform, and also fosters innovation to move the effort more to the last mile than as much in doing a lot of back-end plumbing. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I completely agree. I think power asymmetry is there for everybody to see. I think the fact that by the act of having two economic participants, the buyer and seller, on one platform, you are creating what is called as a store of value. That the value of the platform is enriched by the interactions, and the value is stuck on that platform, right? And I keep talking to taxi drivers, the delivery boys. I think they keep saying this, quoting this example. If I have to, or a seller for that matter, if I were to move away from a platform to another platform, my entire transaction history, my credentials, my reputation, which is probably the only way I get chosen over the other person in the pecking order of search, the reputation rating, I end up losing all that when I go from one platform to the other. So as much as the platforms are empowering others, they do extract power by the very model, and it kind of takes away agency too, because if I am able to build business on one platform, and if I don't have the autonomy and access to that kind of a data and move it to another place, you are creating a sort of a power asymmetry. So I think that's loud and clear in my mind. I think that's a problem that we should be solving for. And so therefore, the idea of Beckn is to sort of give that agency, and that's the word Beckn, actually saying that, just at your own command, sort of give that ability for a seller or a small business to stand up on his own command, say that, hey, I'm available to do business on my terms. So that opportunity is what you are enabling through a more protocol-centric, as a network rather than a single centralized platform. And what it probably also does is to kind of expand the whole value exchange. Because it's not one central store of value operated by one sort of an intermediary, you suddenly have many platforms, one-sided platforms, talking to each other, and there's a larger flow of value. So this whole transition from store of value to flow of value, I think is critical for market expansion, more inclusive way of expansion, and generating that agency, because people want to make most of doing business online if online is the way forward, because most of the consumers are becoming hyper connected and they want to check for options online. Even if I know there's a grocery store right next to me offering bread, I don't know. The fact that I'm searching for bread, the seller doesn't know that, the fact that he has bread, I don't know. I just end up doing, that's the kind of direction we're going to. If digital is a default, then I don't think small business should be denied that opportunity. And that, I think you're right, absolutely right.
One last question on this, and then we'll move on to the conversation on ONDC. A protocol built for for mobility in general today is part of a skilling stack that the government has announced as part of its budget. It's part of a e-commerce conversation that everyone's talking about since the press release has been out. How did that happen? How did it move from mobility to skilling to e-commerce?
Yeah, I would call it a good set of happy accidents. So like I said, we were only looking at mobility, but I think when we were trying to solve for or sort of create this vocabulary for mobility, the generic nature of the vocabulary. So if you typically look at any transaction between any consumer provider, agnostic of which sector you're talking about, it essentially goes through these 4 broad stages. You go from discovery, where you're searching for something, then you find something, then you place an order, you pay for it or you pay later, and then you track the fulfillment. If it's a physical fulfillment, like a taxi coming and picking you up, or a grocery item being delivered to you, you track for it, and then you receive it, and then either you offer rating or you put a complaint and you initiate returns, the whole post-fulfillment. So broadly, if you look at any order lifecycle, whether you're talking about accessing skill or taking a doctor appointment or placing a order in retail commerce or mobility, it goes through this discovery, order, fulfillment, post-fulfillment, which is the underlying essence. So if that is a common pattern that we see, so we have tried to encode that common generic vocabulary into the Beckn protocol, and the Beckn protocol by design allows it to layer sectoral sort of what you call taxonomy on top of this generic vocabulary. So the Beckn protocol core specifications are actually generic. It doesn't recognize any particular sector as itself. So we unbundled or abstracted Beckn out of Beckn mobility in some sense and made it open to allow for layering of sectoral taxonomy. So which is why an ONDC can use the Beckn protocol with a retail taxonomy, or a health network can look at a health taxonomy on the underlying Beckn vocabulary. So that's possible. So that's kind of the deeper truth that we discovered, and yeah, it's been a fascinating journey ever since.
I think this sets it up very well for the ONDC conversation, Sujith. Everyone's got a view of ONDC now. I think it's become this word that everyone's talking about, and there is this notion that Nandan's building the next e-commerce company, which is not true at all. So tell us about ONDC. What is it trying to solve, number one? And I'd love to, after you've shared your overview, take it to the last mile. What does it mean for a person? What does it mean for a retailer? And I think it'll be good to see ONDC from the lens of the retailer rather than the lens of the top.
Great. No, sure. I think ONDC, as you said, is getting some kind of attention and discussions, and I've been part of that. And the first thing that I want to clarify about ONDC is that it has network in its name. It's called Open Network for Digital Commerce. It's not a platform, but a network. A network that by itself does not do anything until there are platforms joining this to make it a network. So that's what ONDC is, essentially a network. Sort of think of it as a sort of a digital public rail, which is setting up the rail in form of specifications based using the underlying Beckn protocol, and allowing for platforms which has some amount of buyers or sellers as part of their tenants to come and access this rail and make most of what this interconnection that can happen between the platforms which has large set of buyers and the platforms which has large set of users. Now, fundamentally, it allows that. So as a network by itself, it doesn't do anything, but it enables for the platforms, both on the buyer side and seller side, to find a way to talk to each other in a common way, with a common language, which is the underlying protocol. Now, this automatically throws up options, not just for the existing platforms to come on board, but suddenly it opens up it for any new small or big platform. In fact, if you were to take that last mile example, a kirana store in any city in the country can probably even build its own bespoke application, if it were to, and connect to ONDC. You don't have to rely on one aggregator to do this. Any small, smart, big tech company can help a kirana go online. Of course, it requires the kirana to be digitized on its catalog and inventory. But once that is done, the kirana store does not have to worry about which platform, how will I make my platform reach all the users? Because that's the problem that ONDC solves for. Because all you have to do is put up your hand and say that, hey, I'm registered on ONDC, my platform, and here's my catalog. And then the buyer platforms will do their side of the problem solving by bringing buyers to discover this kirana store and the catalog items. For example, if there's a kirana store in North Bangalore, the users in North Bangalore, if somebody is searching for a packet of bread, okay, when that search happens on the buyer platform by the buyer, the search will naturally get made available to all the platforms, including the platform on which this particular kirana person is on, and they can respond, saying not just that I have a packet of bread, but I happen to be just 500 meters or 2 kilometers away from you, and I can actually deliver it in 5 to 10 minutes. That's one thing it solves. It does that naturally. So suddenly you are able to access demand in your neighborhood. And if you're a big player, you're into other kind of businesses, you can access demand pretty much across the country wherever the network is going live. Or the platforms are, that are on ONDC already present. What it also does is help these small businesses in case if they don't have their own fulfillment capacity, like a logistic or delivery boy to go ahead and deliver, they can use the network to find a similar set of platforms which are offering logistics services and use their services to help pick up this order from the store and have it delivered to the end customer. So it's solving for at least for today, the way the ONDC is going live with the beta, it solves for both the retail discovery and order, and also solves for logistics as well. So on both sides, a kirana store stands to benefit by being on the network, and this is being done at a fraction of a cost. So tomorrow, if there's a POS machine provider, which is traditionally only accepting payments, can get ONDC enabled through this protocol, and the POS machine is sufficient for the kirana store to start receiving orders from the neighborhood. The user probably would be placing an order from a Paytm or a PhonePe or a Google Pay or a Google search, and all the orders come to the kirana store person on the POS, and he can accept the order and plan for the fulfillment. This is just one. I mean, think of every such kirana store, every such restaurant, or any such goods and services provider in an urban setup having natural access to what people are searching for in their neighborhood. Okay, it'll also help them, look at that search stream and plan ahead of what they are hearing from their neighborhood and plan for their inventory, saying, okay, I'm selling this product more than the others, maybe I should keep that stock more. So they're being more informed. And they being informed will help the supply chain that is feeding those products into them also being more informed. And ONDC will also bring probably the supply chain, the wholesalers and distributors also onto the same network, because all works on the same protocol. So suddenly you are able to unlock information, make it naturally discoverable, and help kirana stores, small businesses avail the network to do business better.
Yeah, and I know we've been talking about bread and shopkeepers, and seems like a more intuitive case, with all the 10-minute deliveries. But if I actually move this to an artisan conversation or a craft person conversation, suddenly I'm in, Vadagara, for example, in Kerala. I was talking to a local entrepreneur there. They apparently make these boat replicas, which are apparently fantastic. No one knows where they're from. Now I can say I need a boat replica, and you will get to that gentleman in Vadagara, and he would actually get a sense of where are my boats getting sold, because today he doesn't know. He is an artisan sitting in his workshop. People buy from him, but he has no idea where it's going. Today he can actually use ONDC to say, I realize that 50% of my sales are actually happening in Jaipur. And if he wants a partner in Jaipur, he can actually say, listen, a lot of people are buying my stuff. I could actually get into an agreement with you. Can we buy and do more stuff there? Because especially things like crafts, the obscurity of information and data is so huge. You don't know what is selling, who is buying. Even creative entrepreneurs who want to source have no idea where to get it from. And pretty much everyone's doing what agents used to do for basketball players, right? So go to every show, see this, and just see value that it can unlock for them in terms of discovery in sectors where information asymmetry is even higher than bread.
I think many people are yet to see as one of the biggest enablers in ONDC is this whole democratization of discovery. Today, the fact that I have something to sell, okay, doesn't mean that I can be naturally discovered. Fine, you can have a website and all that, but how many people will end up reaching your website, right? It's because there are too many websites and you have a search through which you discover or may not discover. But here, if somebody is searching for something, and if I have something even closely relevant to that item that means, I will become naturally discoverable. So if somebody is searching for, hey, a nice handicraft, and if you're looking for that little, a replica boat, I should be able to find even the Vadakara person. And more importantly, because of this happening, as you said, if the bulk of the market is Jaipur, there will be another entrepreneur who will say, hey, I will offer you near market warehousing facility through ONDC, and I'll keep stock. I'll probably buy some stock and keep it and offer it myself, or I can help you stock your own inventory closer to the market and have it delivered in a single day. Because that information is now available not just for the buyer and the seller ecosystem, but the entire, so the actors in between, small and big warehouse providers who have some idle capacity and all, to latch on to ONDC and say, hey, you know what, there is this transaction happening. I am available in case you're looking for stocking it in the near market, so your fulfillment rates are better. That, because of this removal of information asymmetry that happens with democratization of discovery, is going to probably create almost a new efficient way of looking at supply chains, capital allocation across the value chain. And I think that's where I think there'll be the scope for a lot of innovation and expansion happening in a much big way. And that creates opportunities.
I want to talk about how we can get the party started, because the value in its heyday is going to be great. I'm looking at UPI because UPI was similar. Google Pay made a big difference. The fact that Google put its own app, everybody trusted. The number of Beam users versus Google Pay users to the PhonePe users is significant. Is there a first adopter sort of a challenge here? Because we are also talking about a market where there are fairly large, significantly invested companies that are already doing commerce. How do we get this on the demand side? On the consumer side, how do we get people to adopt ONDC? Because this is not in the interest of an Amazon or a Flipkart to adopt ONDC today, at least as far as I can see, because they're well-entrenched systems they probably are using as the differentiators. I don't know how you see that.
I think on the interest side, I think there is interest. I will probably keep interest and urgency as two separate things. I think the fact that we have close to 200 million users who use digital payments in India, thanks to UPI and others. But I think only a fraction of that actually buy online. Okay, and I think pandemic did aggravate the situation of looking at, hey, anybody who can deliver even grocery immediately to my doorstep. So I think there is that general awareness that's there on the demand side, and but yet many of these platforms which actually have large number of captive users in some sense, either on payment side or just doing search or looking for location in a map, these platforms did not have a way to onboard the supply side ecosystem so quickly. So I think there is a latent buyer need, and I think that discovery will increasingly become digital than physical. I mean, we will probably want to locate the store even before we want to go and ask whether they have an item or not. I think that behavior is kind of there latent. But with ONDC, that ability to translate that intent into an actual work functioning search and convert that into an order, that access will go up. So I think that's where I think everybody is I think all the big platforms, anybody with decent set of users on the demand side are definitely talking to ONDC, at least all the big names. I'm sure they're all in the conversation. But I think the urgency will come from some of these young, smart entrepreneurs who are wanting to take big bets, right? Like neo challenges. And interestingly, we are seeing that at least in the first cohort. We have companies like Growth Falcon, Go Frugal has been there for a while, Seller App, all wanting to punch above their weight as a small young startup and saying that, hey, I can bring a set of seller side ecosystem, their catalogs on, because I don't need that excess capital of fundraise to solve for customer acquisition. Because with ONDC, you've shifted the narrative from customer acquisition to a low-cost order acquisition. Yeah. So if you do that, I have a play. And I can probably be the first. I think that's what happened with UPI. I think some of these apps like PhonePe probably were not existent even before UPI. So I think the neo challenges definitely add momentum. The early momentum will come from them. But I don't see a reason why even the big players will stay away. For the simple reason that you're talking about market expansion. Okay, from a 7%, if you're waiting for it to, okay, let it become 30% and then I'll get into the market, I don't think it's a prudent thinking from any big or small businesses, so they want to come in. But you'll see momentum from the younger ones. Yeah.
What struck me when you were talking about that is that anyone who has an audience today and wants the audience to stay longer, Google Maps, for example, probably would want to use this and say, hey, can I monetize, engage you more to make this happen? And you're right that the young startups today, just the barriers of entry have come down, they're going to come in. I want to now move to the supply side. Is the digital literacy or the digital readiness of the shopkeepers, the artisans, the intermediaries that work with these people a challenge?
I think if you look at, I think everybody, at least from my conversations, the limited conversation I have with members of, with KIT or Retail Association of India or some of the artisans or even the taxi drivers that I interact with in the city of Kochi, I think digital is a reality that they don't want to avoid or stay away from. That's a reality that they've embraced. And the fact that today they accept payments through apps and the fact that payments happens at the end of commerce, and I think the fact that there are so many UPI users across the country, I think they're pretty much accustomed to this. Just that they have a mental model that they have to wait for somebody to onboard them to make them do business online. I think that's a mindset that will take time, because as and when the options start opening up and people say that, hey, I can be a small white label provider, it's your rules, your terms, which is what we are seeing with the mobility for pilot we are doing, is that you set your rules, you set your terms, whether it's a cancellation policy, return policy, you don't have to heed to the terms of a particular intermediary or anybody, but at your own command, based on what level of inventory investments you're making and all that. That autonomy for you to do that and the options that allows you to do that, I think once that opening up, I think they will gradually start embracing this more. I think from the interactions that I'm having with some of the cohort participants, they're saying that the moment we explain this, I think more so in restaurants than grocery, I think there's a unanimous yes from their side saying that, why not? Why shouldn't we do this? And I think it also fractionalizes the cost of transaction because you're moving from low volume, high value to extremely low value, high volume kind of a thing. You're sachetizing commerce in some sense. So that also adds to their unit economics and scale. And that's probably how I see supply side coming up. But it takes a lot. There is that little bit of digital divide. So for example, there are apps which are trying to bring natural language interaction, okay, and reduce screen dependency. Okay, a seller has enough things to deal with in a store, so don't expect the seller to be on the phone. So there are a lot of ways in which they're trying to simplify access to the digital interface, and I already see natural language interfaces being brought in. I see companies like Navana Tech through a voice memo digitizing five fast selling items of the seller's catalog. Okay, and that gets translated into English, machine readable thing. The buyer could be, probably speaking in English, but probably you'll have a voice out in Gujarati as a seller so that yes, order accept kar lo, or things like that in Hindi. Those are the things that will reduce this friction. But that's still, that's a problem we will deal with as problems of the human machine interface, digital interface. ONDC can solve to an extent, but it allows for acceleration of these efforts, because now entrepreneur has a chance. If he's a good NLP bot maker, he says that despite me being I have a good algorithm, I cannot be an e-commerce player because e-commerce entails 10 other things, acquiring customers and all that. But now that is out of the equation. You'll have some of these smart tech guys offering those interfaces too.
I want to connect this back to the conversation we had about protocol and saying democratizing the ability to solve problems. And I think this is just a very, very good example for that, because I can imagine a product manager in an e-commerce company telling, NLP for Gujarati, he's like, my product backlog, that's going to be item number 27. And now you just make this available for everybody to come and do it because there are multiple companies and probably some guy in Surat who's saying this is my core value proposition.
So there are a few companies which are saying, I have a good pricing algorithm for mobility, but I'm not a mobility aggregator. So we have this local sort of a digital cooperative of a mobility pilot that's happening in Kochi. In fact, it went live July last year, called Kochi Open Mobility Network, where another third party who is interested to offer pricing algorithms to the taxi, and there's a taxi company itself has built an app through another software company. I mean, the JustPay, I'm sure you would have heard about it. They've also built the early version of BIM app. So you can have these value coming from multiple people to trying to kind of offer a solution to that end seller, and that ability of distributing the problem solving to a wider ecosystem, which allows more entrepreneurs, the solution providers, to come in and stitch together a solution that makes it easier for the seller. That's possible. You're not dependent on one sort of a party or an entity to solve for all the problems. Yeah.
One of the discussions we had when we talked about Oaken was this idea of the policy environment being what it is, for you to authenticate people, to know that they are legitimate, etc., and how that often reduces the speed with which this can be done. E-commerce has been dealing with the issue of fake products and spurious sellers, etc. And oftentimes it is the job of the brand to ensure that spurious sellers and fake products are sold. Yeah. In a distributed environment like this, where everyone's working, who's taking the accountability of the risk?
No, great question. I think this is something that comes with the design, the challenge, because there is always this idea that regulation is applied on an entity, and that creates the whole idea of a centralized vantage point where it has to be applied. So I'll apply it on an intermediary, and that intermediary will make sure the buyers and sellers are doing this. In case of an open network like ONDC, you have no center. It has no center where you can apply this. So which is where I think the design of the protocol becomes essential, because what the protocol allows for is to find a way to translate these rules, regulations and policies into some machine readable code that could be overlaid on the protocol. And what it does, it sort of allows for ex ante enablement of a policy to kind of keep these checks and balances of any kind of bad behavior, whether it's fake products or products which are not properly listed as per the requirements of whatever is the Metrology Act and others. Those are things that the network will automatically enable. And the fact that you have a buyer and seller, any buyer or seller can probably say, hey, your items seem to be fake, and I can report it. That possibility happens. It doesn't mean that you need to have somebody at the center doing that. And even ONDC Limited is not at the center. They're facilitating this policy to be overlaid. The other important thing in digital is the fact that if there's a way for policy or enablement or compliance to happen through incentive. And that's where reputation system makes a lot of sense. So if I am a seller offering fake products, okay, there is a way for them to kind of get marginalized, because now you can have a network level reputation system, not a platform level rating system, but a network level. So even if you have to go from a platform A to platform B, of course you can always change your name or incorporate with your friend or family, but essentially it makes it that much more difficult and inconvenient to continue to do to kind of display bad behavior. So the network level reputation, which is interoperable, which also solves for the other problem, the point that I was mentioning earlier. If a seller moves away from platform A and goes to another platform, he has to start from scratch. But this network level interoperability also serves the purpose of building on top of what you have done already, even if you move to a new platform, but also kind of puts a kind of essential kind of a check in their mind saying that this can also go bad if you start demonstrating bad behavior. And those are things that the network as a feature facility offers in terms of reputation systems and policy rails, kind of enhances the trust of the network. I mean, let's be honest, even if you're buying a seller from a big platform, you are in sort of tacitly or sort of assuming that the platform has verified the seller and you believe those ratings are root. Okay, I have personally received orders in which you're saying that again, I'll give you $50 if you rate me well, right? So there's only humans, we only trust, we go with whatever is optically visible as a rating. But now if you can build this at a network level, which is not specific to one platform but agnostic at a level, and there's a way to verify that, I think there will be some level of trust checks and balances, and consumers will be able to wanting to come and look at these sort of trust instruments like rating and all before they place an order.
Trust is such a sensitive sort of issue. It's a soft issue. The first set of people you bring on board, the first set of products you allow for transaction, and building that behavior over a period of time to say, hey, start with the small stuff and then be able to go. Or we'll curate the first set of people who are coming in and then we will be able to make it open. I mean, I'm sure there are ways to sort of think about it today, because I think trust is going to be a huge part of what we want to do. Because for me, for example, the reason I stick with Amazon is just because I trust the brand, So how do we sort of build that, I think, is going to be important. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, is there some part of the ecosystem today, Sujith, that is still probably not as mature for us to make this a reality? I mean, I am guessing the logistics service providers, etc., are probably very many because of what we do. But are there parts of it where you say, hey, this ecosystem is still evolving, that part of the system is probably still not ready yet?
No, if you're looking at an ecosystem scale, I think there's a lot of maturity still to be desired, because I think today most of this is problem solved, especially on the fulfillment side, because protocol is all digital, but the fulfillment is physical. So that itself is like unlike UPI, which is all money, it's all digital transfer, digital fulfillment. Here e-commerce actually entails physical fulfillment, and that's where things start crumbling, right? The cookie starts crumbling. There's a trust issue, whether food item is delivered on time, not on time, it's a fake item delivered, and things like that. I don't think there is that maturity at an ecosystem level. A few monolithic platforms which do end-to-end, have done it, have learned it the hard way through years of, trials. But I think that needs to be you need to start infusing that maturity. And that's where I think ONDC Limited and the larger ecosystems and entrepreneurs, that's a challenge and the opportunity. I mean, it's an opportunity for fintech or the insurance guys or for small local digital cooperative aggregators of say delivery agents or warehouses to do seller education or seller credentialing. Okay, that could be all opportunities. I mean, why can't we have multiple rating service providers who actually do some QC checks and all? So it creates an opportunity of other players trying to contribute to trust and do that. But it's a journey. It's not going to happen so soon. It will take its time. But I think the inherent value that I do have supply liquidity on the network. I can access many number of catalogs, especially grocery, which is largely a long tail problem. The fact that I can discuss several is the beginning. But over a period of time, through this ecosystem participation and these things like reputation systems and policy and all that, digital policies, I think we will be able to drive to that maturity. It's not going to be easy. I mean, nobody says it's going to be easy or quick or certain in any ways, but that's a journey. Yeah.
Maybe one last question on this, and maybe a reflection. I'm realizing the amount of entrepreneurial energy this is going to unlock, right? And just the possibilities. You can be a warehouse provider. You can be a digitization partner for shopkeepers. You can be a fintech player offering supply chain finance for this or purchase order finance for this if there are large orders. Logistics providers, you can be trust parties, as you said, you can be communications agencies, audience marketing providers that can create audience generation. I think just the ecosystem of entrepreneurial energy that we have to unlock for this to be real and just creates value, I think is significant. And I think what is exciting for me there, that it's not a Delhi, Bombay, Calcutta entrepreneurial energy. There's probably somebody in Jharsuguda right now who's saying, listen, I have warehouses I can create for enabling better transport. And I know which products are coming to Jharsuguda, who's ordering what. So perishable, non-perishable, I can actually build warehouses right now and register myself. And discovery is lesser a problem because how many warehouse providers exist in Jharsuguda. So if somebody wants it, they're available. And this distributed entrepreneurship that can actually create jobs across the country if it goes well. I know we're all building castles in the air at the moment, is a massive opportunity, because the problem so far has been that job creation still has been a very, very, very Gurgaon, Bangalore, Bombay conversation.
If you look at the beta live that has already happened, it's not just in Delhi and Bangalore. We are looking at Udupi, Sikkim, Coimbatore, Tier 1, Tier 2, 3 is already, there are sellers who are already doing ONDC transaction at some scale. Of course, it's the early days and just a beta pilot with a few set of users from the local beta buying list that Paytm has, which is the first app to go live. But you're right. I think this will unlock opportunities across pin codes, across locations, and it'll offer opportunities anywhere. So I foresee an area where There could be platforms which says, hey, I have a white label SaaS platform to digitize catalog as a service, or order management as a service. And there may be some local village entrepreneur who will just bring the local ecosystem online and be a local sort of a social aggregator of merchants there using some third-party smart platform hosted anywhere. So it's like a micro sort of a Shopify with a village entrepreneur trying to bring that ecosystem on board, whether it's artisans or agricultural farm produce that you're trying to sell, or textiles or carpet manufacturers in Uttar Pradesh. You can create that kind of an entrepreneurial, micro-entrepreneurial opportunity. So we're not looking at big unicorns probably, but many small, which is much bigger groundswell than what one or two unicorns can create here.
Talking about a promised future, but Sujith, it'll be great to hear, where are we today? And I'd love to know, where are we today with respect to the Beckn protocol, and where are we today with respect to ONDC? And then I'd have a final question to sort of wrap this up.
Sure. So Beckn as a protocol was an idea that was put together by the foundation as the genesis of the authors. But today there's a wider spectrum of community that contributes to the evolution of the protocol. So for Beckn to go from mobility to e-commerce and other things is just not happened by itself, for a bunch of us who put the idea first. But today we have volunteers, entrepreneurs, tech players who are already in this ecosystem, giving their valuable time. We have these weekly check-ins on community calls. There are 4 or 5 communities across local retail, delivery, healthcare, all of that, who are taking time to participate and contribute to what is missing, what can be added, how can it be done better. So it's become a very community-contributed, community-governed protocol. So it's truly an open source protocol, and anybody can access that, and anybody can put it into action. It is not just for being part of open networks, but the amount of knowledge it encapsulates for anybody to build their own APIs, whether it's joining network or not, it's still a handy sort of a tool for them to have. So one is that I think Beckn is getting kind of having its own orbit by itself in terms of community taking it forward, and vibrant community which is growing. We are also seeing references of Beckn being adopted for sectors like, as I said, healthcare and others. And also we are seeing some of the adoptions happening outside of India. There are entrepreneurs who are trying to take this idea and implement it in countries in Europe and other places in Africa, saying that, hey, can we do this for others? So as an open protocol, it's facilitating those kind of idea generation and conversations. But I think the biggest in terms of what I can see as a manifestation of Beckn protocol is the ONDC initiative itself, and it's kind of phenomenal to see how an idea can quickly gather such momentum and grow. I think till about December there was no ONDC as an entity, but suddenly we have an entity, and then there's this whole fantastic leadership and of course the advisory council that is coming together and giving it a push. And today we have network going live. Between December and now, the network is already live in some form as beta, and you have participants, big and small, participating and sort of shifting the business model to be ONDC ready. That ONDC itself has a lot of room for growth. I mean, we're just starting with retail and logistics in few cities. The city horizon itself will expand. Okay, just for retail, and when I say retail, includes both grocery, restaurants, and few other things. But beyond retail and logistics, as I spoke about the supply chain, that can open up on ONDC. I see conversations happening around enabling agriculture or rural commerce to also be part of ONDC. Then I think it can foray into sectors like tourism, travel, stay. I think there's a possibility for that expansion. But obviously, not getting ahead of ourselves in terms of saying where all it can go, but I think the potential is definitely there. But I think it's a collective will and that entrepreneurship zeal, not just of ONDC Limited as a company, but of the ecosystem, wanting to make most of it and can drive this sort of network to go beyond what one can imagine right now.
One of the questions that we always end with is this question of what can philanthropy do to drive this and accelerate this forward. And there are times where philanthropy shouldn't do anything. And there are times where it can add value. I mean, just from our conversation today, I'm thinking the last mile digitization that we talked about, is there a way partners, philanthropy can enable that I can do this for you type of an approach. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this, Sujith. Where can it add value?
Beckn as an idea was a philanthropic nudge in some sense. We were thinking dearly about solving for mobility, and I said, it doesn't take much to get some thinking going and to kind of think about, okay, why don't we put this protocol? That nudge can come from some philanthropic capital and nudge, that's very important. But the nudge should be in a way that they are not trying to solve the entire problem by itself, because I think some of these are definitely by design not scalable. Okay, you cannot just have 1 or 2 or 3 philanthropic agencies trying to solve the entire problem at a population scale. But thinking of digital public goods or open ecosystems and creating an opportunity for others to build on a very small thing that you created as a building block on which I can build 10 other things. I think that's where philanthropic ventures can offer that much needed starting plug or that spark plug kind of a thing to get the conversation started. I definitely believe that's a possibility. I think it's tad unfair to expect government to solve for everything or just the market to solve for things. So there's an opportunity to get into that sort of the space where nobody else looking at and solve for this problem. And it's sort of good and bad that it takes a philanthropic nudge to think about digital public goods like protocols, but I'm hoping that going forward, this conversation will become an opportunity for everybody to look at protocols seriously again. Yeah.
And I want to build on what you're saying, and it's so important because a lot of time philanthropy has a view of saying, I've put this $1, I want to see where it got paid out. But poverty is such a complex problem. You're laying it out brick by brick. So the most important question is your brick in the right place? So creating these digital public goods, because it allows for somebody to jump on top, build on top. And that mindset of thinking of it as a long game and saying, I'm adding components to this that is going to help solve the problem, I think is a big shift. And it's a very, very necessary one. Sujith, I have so much more to ask you. And this has been a fascinating conversation. It's one of those rare times where, 3 things are coming together for me. One is the idea that we are talking about something which is fairly abstract, but can be tied down to something very, very tangible. 2, it's relating to a problem all of us can sort of touch and feel. It's not a poverty problem that I can't understand. I relate to it because I'm both a consumer and a player in this game. And 3, it's also one of those things where what we're doing here in India actually holds true and holds the light for the rest of the world. And in sort of hence setting a new path, not just for ourselves, but in some sense for the rest of the world as well. Thank you so much. This has been very, very helpful, and thanks so much for your insights.
No, thank you so much. It's been a very lively interaction. I'm glad that we're putting this story out. It's been fascinating talking to you.
You have been listening to Decoding Impact. To learn more about Sattva and Sattva Knowledge Institute, please explore sattva.co.in. We invite you to like, share, and subscribe to Decoding Impact so you never miss out on new episodes. Thank you for joining us.